Clara Whitmore tore the telegram into pieces with her bare hands. Standing alone on the empty platform at Dusty Creek, Texas. She let the paper fall like ashes around her boots. The man who had promised her a new life was dead. Buried 3 days before her train ever arrived. And the townspeople watching from across the street offered no water, no help, no kindness. They just stared at the woman nobody wanted. The woman who had traveled 1,000 miles to marry a ghost. She had 12 cents left, and nowhere in the world to go. If you want to know how one moment of mercy changed Clara's life forever, subscribe to this channel and stay until the very end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The telegram had arrived that morning, handed to Clara through the train window by a station boy who couldn't meet her eyes. She read it 3 times before the words made sense. Ezra Compton, deceased. Buried June 12th. No arrangements made for your arrival. That was all. No apology, no explanation. Just 10 words that erased the future she had spent 6 months building in her mind. Clara folded the telegram carefully, the way her mother had taught her to fold important documents, and tucked it into her sleeve. She would not cry on this train. She would not give these strangers the satisfaction of watching a woman fall apart in public. The train pulled into Dusty Creek 40 minutes later. She stepped onto the platform with a single trunk, a carpet bag, and the kind of stillness that comes when a person has decided to hold everything inside until they find a private place to let it out. That private place never came. You, the Compton bride. Clara turned. A heavy-set man in a sweat-stained shirt stood a few feet away, thumbs hooked in his suspenders, looking at her the way a person looks at a problem they didn't ask for. She said. I understand Mr. Compton has passed. 3 days ago. The man spat tobacco juice onto the platform boards. Heart gave out. Doc said it was coming for years. He looked her up and down without any particular interest. Reckon you'll be wanting the next train back east. When does it come? Tuesday. It was Saturday. Clara kept her face still. Is there a boarding house in town? The man laughed. It was not a kind laugh. Boarding house is full up. Cattlemen's Association meeting all week. Every room in town spoken for. He shrugged. There's the saloon, I suppose. They rent rooms by the hour, if you catch my meaning. Clara caught his meaning. She picked up her trunk without another word and walked toward the main street of Dusty Creek. Behind her, she heard the man say something to someone else, and then laughter. She did not turn around. The town was small and sun-bleached and brutal in the June heat. Clara walked its entire length in 15 minutes, asking at every door. The general store had no rooms. The feed shop owner's wife looked at her with something like pity and said they had no space. The church was locked, and when Clara knocked, no one answered. By the time the sun began to set, she had asked at 11 doors and received 11 refusals. She sat down on the steps of the general store because her legs would not carry her any further. Her throat was dry. Her dress was soaked through with sweat. And the 12 cents in her pocket would not buy a meal, let alone a place to sleep. This was when she met Emmeline Foster. The older woman appeared from inside the store, locking the door behind her, and almost tripped over Clara sitting on her steps. Lord have mercy. Emmeline caught herself on the railing and looked down. You the Compton bride. Everyone keeps calling me that. Well, you were gonna be, weren't you? Emmeline's voice was sharp, but not unkind. Word travels fast in a town this small. Ezra Compton sends away for a wife drops dead before she arrives. It's the most interesting thing that's happened here since Marcus Delaney's bull got loose in the church last Easter. Clara looked up at her. I need work, and a place to stay. I can cook, clean, men keep books. I'm not afraid of hard labor. Emmeline studied her for a long moment. Then she sighed. Come with me. Clara followed her to a small house at the edge of town. It was weathered but clean, with a garden out front that showed signs of recent care. I can't pay much, Emmeline said, unlocking the door. But I need help in the store, and my back isn't what it used to be. You can have the room in the back. It's small, but it's private. 3 meals a day and $2 a week. Clara's throat tightened. Why are you helping me? Emmeline paused in the doorway. Because I was you once. 40 years ago. Came out here with a man who promised me the world and delivered me to a dirt floor cabin and his drinking habit. She looked back at Clara with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. I know what it's like to have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. I also know what it's like when someone decides to help anyway. Clara nodded. She did not trust her voice. Get some sleep, Emmeline said. Work starts at dawn. 3 weeks passed. Clara learned Emmeline's general store the way she had learned everything in her life, by watching, listening, and making herself useful before anyone thought to ask. She learned which farmers paid on time and which ones needed gentle reminding. She learned that the sheriff, a man named Harlan Briggs, was useless in any situation that involved someone with money. And she learned that the name spoken most often in Dusty Creek, sometimes with respect and sometimes with fear, was Marcus Delaney. Delaney owned the largest ranch in the territory. His land stretched for miles in every direction, and his cattle drives employed half the working men in 3 counties. He was, by all accounts, the most powerful man within 100 miles. He was also, Clara came to understand, the reason Ezra Compton was dead. She learned this on a Tuesday evening, when Emmeline had a little too much sherry after supper, and her tongue loosened. Ezra was a good man, Emmeline said, staring into her glass. Stubborn as a mule, but good. He had 40 acres with water rights, best water source this side of the Brazos during drought season. Delaney wanted that land, offered to buy it 3 times. Ezra refused 3 times. Clara set down her mending. What happened? What always happens when a small man stands in a big man's way. Emmeline's voice went flat. Ezra's cattle started dying. His fences started falling. His hired hands quit one by one, said they'd been offered better wages elsewhere. Then one morning, Ezra's heart just stopped. You think Delaney? I don't think anything. Emmeline's eyes met hers, sharp and warning. And neither do you. Not out loud, not in this town. She took another drink. Ezra had no family. His land goes to auction next month. Care to guess who's the only bidder? Clara said nothing, but something cold settled in her chest and stayed there. It was a Sunday when they brought Samuel Harding in. Clara was sweeping the back porch when she heard the commotion hooves on hard-packed dirt. Men's voices raised the particular urgency that meant someone was hurt. She set down the broom and walked around to the front of the house. 2 men on horseback had stopped in front of Emmeline's gate. Between them, slumped over the saddle of a 3rd horse, was a man. His shirt was dark with blood. His face was turned away, but Clara could see his hands hanging loose, his body completely still. Mrs. Foster, one of the riders called out. We need help. Found him out by Miller's Creek, shot twice near as we can tell. Emmeline appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She took one look at the wounded man and turned to Clara. Get the back room ready. Clean sheets, hot water, all the bandages you can find. Clara moved without hesitation. She had tended wounds before her mother had been a healer's daughter, and knowledge like that passed down whether you wanted it or not. She stripped the bed, laid out clean linens, set water to boil, and gathered every strip of clean cloth she could find. By the time the men carried him inside, she was ready. They laid him on the bed as gently as rough men could manage. Up close, Clara could see him properly for the first time. He was tall even lying down. Dark hair matted with sweat and dust. A face that weather and time had worked on without being specific about how long. He could have been 35 or 45. There was a scar along his jaw, old and faded, and his hands, even unconscious, were the hands of a man who had done hard work his whole life. He say anything? Emmeline asked the riders. Give a name. Nothing. He was already out when we found him. Horse was standing over him like it was standing guard. "Good horse," one of the men added as if that mattered. "Quality animal." Clara noticed the badge then, pinned inside his coat, half hidden by blood and fabric. A U.S. Marshal star. "He's Law," she said quietly. Emmeline leaned in to look. Was Law more like? "That badge has been off the books for a while. See how it's scratched up. Man carrying a badge like that isn't currently employed by anyone official." The riders exchanged glances. "We don't want no trouble, Mrs. Foster. We just found him and figured someone ought to help." "You did right," Emmeline said. "Now get on before dark. And don't go telling the whole town we've got a half-dead stranger in my back room. Last thing I need is Harlan Briggs sniffing around asking questions he's too lazy to find answers to." The men left. Emmeline turned to Clara. "You know how to clean a bullet wound." "I know how to try." "Then try. I'll fetch Doc Pearson, but he won't come till morning. Too fond of his whiskey on Sundays." She grabbed her shawl. "Keep him breathing till I get back." The door closed, and Clara was alone with a dying stranger. She worked for 3 hours. The first bullet had gone clean through his side, which was lucky. The second had lodged in his shoulder, which was not. Clara didn't have the tools or the knowledge to remove it, so she cleaned around it as best she could, packed the wound with honey the way her mother had taught her, and wrapped it tight. He didn't wake. But he didn't die either. Sometime around midnight, his fever spiked. Clara sat beside the bed, pressing cool cloths to his forehead, watching his chest rise and fall in that shallow, uncertain way of a body fighting to keep going. "You don't get to die," she told him quietly. "Not in my room. Not when I just got the sheets clean." He didn't respond, but his breathing steadied just slightly. Around 2 in the morning, his eyes opened. Clara had been dozing in the chair beside the bed. She startled awake to find him looking at her, not with confusion, but with that focused, assessing gaze of a man who woke up in unfamiliar places often enough to make evaluation a habit. "Where?" His voice was barely a rasp. "Dusty Creek, Texas. You were shot. Some men found you by Miller's Creek and brought you here." He processed this. "My horse." "Safe. In the stable out back." Something in his face relaxed, just slightly. "Water," he said. Clara helped him drink from a tin cup, supporting his head with one hand. He managed 3 swallows before the effort exhausted him. "What's your name?" she asked. A pause. The kind of pause that meant he was deciding how much to tell her. "Sam," he said finally. "Sam Harding. I'm Clara Whitmore. You're in Emmeline Foster's house. She runs the general store. The doctor will come in the morning to look at your shoulder." He nodded once the smallest movement. "Who shot you?" Clara asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "Men who didn't want me to finish what I started." "Which was?" His eyes met hers. Even fevered, even half dead, there was something in that gaze that made Clara feel like she was being read, measured, assessed for trustworthiness. "Hunting," he said finally. "Hunting what?" "Someone who needs to be found." He closed his eyes, and within seconds he was unconscious again. Clara sat back in her chair and watched him breathe. Whoever this man was, whatever he was hunting, he had landed in her life uninvited and unannounced. She didn't know yet that he was carrying secrets worth more than gold. Didn't know that the man he was hunting worked for the same Marcus Delaney who had destroyed Ezra Compton. Didn't know that in saving Samuel Harding's life, she had set something in motion that would change everything. All she knew, sitting in that dark room with dawn still hours away, was that she was tired and alone and 12 cents richer than when she'd stepped off that train. And that somewhere in the night, outside, in a territory controlled by men with money and power and no conscience, something was waiting for her that she couldn't yet see. She pressed the cool cloth to his forehead one more time. "Don't die," she said again, softer this time. Almost like a prayer. And Samuel Harding, unconscious and bleeding, and carrying more weight than any one man, should kept breathing. Doc Pearson arrived at dawn with whiskey on his breath and steady hands that didn't match his bloodshot eyes. Clara stood in the doorway and watched him work. He removed the bullet from Samuel's shoulder in under 10 minutes, dropped it into a tin cup with a dull clink, and sewed the wound shut with stitches so small and even they looked like they belonged on a sampler, not a man's flesh. "He'll live," Doc Pearson said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Assuming infection doesn't set in. Keep the wounds clean, keep him still, and keep him away from whatever trouble put those bullets in him in the first place." "Do you know who he is?" Clara asked. Doc Pearson paused at the door. "I know what a marshal's badge looks like, Miss Whitmore. I also know that asking too many questions in this town tends to make a person's life considerably shorter." He tipped his hat. $3 for the visit. Mrs. Foster knows where to find me if the fever comes back." He left without waiting for a response. Clara returned to the bedside. Samuel was still unconscious, but his color had improved. The grayish pallor of the night before had given way to something closer to living. "You're going to be a lot of trouble," she told him quietly. "I can already tell." He didn't answer. But somewhere in the stillness of that small room, Clara had the distinct impression that he heard her anyway. Emmeline appeared in the doorway an hour later with a bowl of broth and a look on her face that Clara had learned to recognize as the precursor to an uncomfortable conversation. "Marcus Delaney came into the store this morning," Emmeline said. Clara's hands went still on the bandage she was rewrapping. "What did he want?" "What he always wants, to remind everyone in town who owns what." Emmeline set the broth on the bedside table. "He asked about the commotion last night. Someone told him we had a visitor." "What did you say?" "That my niece's husband took ill on his way through town and we're nursing him back to health." Emmeline's eyes met Clara's. "You're the niece in case anyone asks." "And if someone asks him?" Clara nodded toward Samuel. "Then we better hope he's smart enough to play along." Emmeline looked at the unconscious man for a long moment. "There's something about this one, Clara. I don't know what, but I've lived long enough to recognize when trouble walks through my door wearing a man's face." She paused. "Keep your eyes open, and don't get attached." Clara wanted to say that she had no intention of getting attached to anyone or anything in this town. That she was here because she had nowhere else to go, not because she chose it. That attachment was a luxury she had given up the day she read that telegram on the train. Instead, she said, "I'll be careful." Emmeline nodded and left. Clara turned back to Samuel Harding and found his eyes open. "How much of that did you hear?" she asked. "Enough." His voice was stronger than it had been in the night. Still rough, but present. "Your aunt?" "She's not my aunt. She's the only person in this town who would give me work after I arrived with nothing." Clara dipped a cloth in cool water and pressed it to his forehead. "She's covering for you. The least you can do is not get her killed." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite surprise, but close to it. "You always this direct with men you just met?" "I don't have time to be anything else." He studied her for a moment. That same assessing gaze she remembered from the night before. "Fair enough." "Who shot you, Mr. Harding?" "Sam." "Who shot you, Sam?" He was quiet for a beat. "Men working for someone I've been tracking for 8 months." "Who?" "That's not something you need to know." Clara wrung out the cloth with more force than necessary. "A man rides into town, half dead, brings trouble to the only person who's shown me kindness since I got here, and I don't need to know who's responsible. Knowing won't help you. It'll just make you a target." "I'm already a target." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I'm a woman alone in a town that doesn't want me working for a widow who's too stubborn to be scared of the men who run this place. If something's coming, I'd rather see it coming." Samuel was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Josiah Polk." Clara's blood went cold. She knew that name. Everyone in Dusty Creek knew that name. Josiah Polk was Marcus Delaney's right hand, his enforcer, the man who made problems disappear and never seemed to get his own hands dirty doing it. "You're hunting Josiah Polk," she said slowly. I'm hunting the men who killed my family. Samuel's voice didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A door opening onto something dark and deep. Polk was there. He wasn't the one who pulled the trigger, but he was there. And he knows who did. Clara sat back in her chair. She understood now. The badge, the wounds, the careful answers. Samuel Harding wasn't just a lawman. He was a man on a mission that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with revenge. If Polk works for Delaney, she said carefully, and Delaney finds out you're here, then things will get complicated. Complicated? Clara almost laughed. That's one word for it. Samuel shifted on the bed, wincing at the movement. I didn't plan to end up here. I was supposed to meet a contact at Miller's Creek, someone who had information about Polk's whereabouts. Instead, I rode into an ambush. Your contact sold you out. Seems that way. Do you know who it was? I have my suspicions. Clara looked at him. This man who had ridden 1,000 miles chasing ghosts, who had nearly died in the pursuit of something that might not even give him peace when he found it. Is it worth it? She asked. Whatever you're looking for, is it worth dying for? Samuel met her eyes. My wife's name was Mary. My daughter was Ellen. She was 4 years old. She liked to collect feathers, and she was afraid of thunderstorms, and she used to fall asleep holding my hand. His voice was steady, but there was a weight beneath it that Clara could feel pressing against the walls of the room. They were killed because I was somewhere else when I should have been home. Because I was chasing a bounty that could have waited. Because I chose the job over them, and they paid the price for it. He paused. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. So yes, it's worth dying for. Because living with it isn't really living at all. Clara didn't know what to say. So she said nothing. She picked up the bowl of broth Emmeline had left and held it out to him. You need to eat, she said. And then you need to rest. Whatever you're planning to do next, you can't do it dead. Samuel took the bowl. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Clara pulled her hand back faster than she meant to. Thank you, he said. For last night, for not letting me die. Don't thank me yet, Clara said. You're still in my room eating my food and bringing my employer's name to the attention of the most dangerous man in the territory. You can thank me when you're gone, and we're still alive. She stood and walked to the door. Miss Whitmore. She stopped. Clara? She turned. Samuel was watching her with that steady, unreadable expression. I won't bring more trouble to this house than I have to. You have my word on that. Words are cheap, Mr. Harding. Sam. Words are cheap, Sam. She held his gaze. Actions are what matter. Show me you mean it, and maybe I'll believe you. She left him alone with his broth and his ghosts. But something had shifted in that room during their conversation. Something small and indefinable. Like a key turning in a lock neither of them had known was there. 3 days passed. Samuel's wounds began to heal faster than Clara expected. By the second day, he was sitting up on his own. By the third, he was insisting on standing, even though the effort left him pale and sweating. You're going to tear your stitches, Clara told him, watching him grip the bedpost for balance. I've had worse. That's not the reassurance you think it is. He almost smiled. It transformed his face, softened the hard edges, made him look younger, more human. Less like a man carved from vengeance, and more like someone who had once known how to laugh. Then the expression was gone, and he was Samuel Harding again, all careful watchfulness and calculated silence. I need to send a message, he said. There's a man in San Antonio who needs to know I'm alive. Who? A federal judge. He's the one who's been helping me track Polk's movements. Clara considered this. You can't be seen in town. If Delaney has people watching, and he does, they'll know within the hour that Emmeline's sick nephew is actually a stranger asking questions. I wasn't going to go myself. Then who? Clara stopped. No. You're the only one who can move freely. The only one Delaney's people won't think twice about. I'm also the only one keeping you alive right now. If something happens to me, you're on your own. Nothing will happen to you. Samuel's voice was certain. You'll walk into the telegraph office, send a message, and walk out. 5 minutes. And if someone asks what I'm doing, you're sending word to your family back east, letting them know you arrived safely. He paused. That's close enough to true that it won't feel like a lie. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she hadn't survived this long by taking unnecessary risks for men she barely knew. But something in his eyes stopped her. Not pleading Samuel Harding didn't seem like a man who knew how to plead. Something else. Something that looked almost like trust. What's the message? She asked finally. Tell Judge Whitfield that the crow has landed but the nest was burned. He'll know what it means. The crow has landed but the nest was burned. Clara repeated it twice to fix it in her memory. That's the whole message. That's enough. She nodded and turned to leave. Clara. She paused at the door. Be careful. There was something in the way he said it that made her stomach tighten. Not fear exactly. Something warmer and more complicated than fear. I'm always careful, she said. It's the only reason I'm still here. The walk to the telegraph office took 12 minutes. Clara counted every step. She had learned in her short time in Dusty Creek that survival meant paying attention, noticing which men lingered too long on street corners, which women crossed the street when they saw her coming, which doors opened and which stayed closed. Today something felt different. She couldn't identify it at first, just a prickling at the back of her neck. The sense that she was being watched more closely than usual. She kept walking, kept her pace steady, didn't look around. The telegraph office was a small building wedged between the bank and the land office. Clara pushed open the door and stepped inside. The operator was a young man with ink-stained fingers and a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes went wide for just a moment before he schooled his expression into something neutral. Morning, miss. Help you with something. I need to send a message to San Antonio. San Antonio? He wrote it down. Name of the recipient. Judge Marcus Whitfield, Federal Courthouse. The operator's pen stopped moving, just for a second. Then he continued writing. And the message? Clara recited it exactly as Samuel had given it to her. The crow has landed, but the nest was burned. The operator stared at the words on his paper. That's the whole message. That's the whole message. He calculated the cost, took her coins, and promised the message would go out within the hour. Clara thanked him and left. She was halfway back to Emmeline's house when a man stepped into her path. Josiah Polk was exactly as Clara had imagined him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that had been weathered by sun and violence into something that looked carved from stone. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless, and they fixed on her with the patient attention of a predator who had all the time in the world. Miss Whitmore. He tipped his hat. Don't believe we've been properly introduced. Clara's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. I don't believe we have. Name's Josiah Polk. I work for Mr. Delaney. He asked me to check in on Mrs. Foster's sick house guest. Wanted to make sure he was getting proper care. That's very thoughtful of Mr. Delaney. He's a thoughtful man. Polk smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. How is the patient recovering well, I hope? He's resting comfortably. The doctor expects a full recovery. Glad to hear it. Polk didn't move. Funny thing, though. Mr. Delaney asked around and nobody seems to know Mrs. Foster had a niece, or that her niece had a husband. Clara's throat tightened. I'm not surprised. Emmeline and I lost touch years ago. Family disagreements. You know how it is. Can't say I do. Polk's eyes never left her face. My family always kept close. Loyalty's important, don't you think, Miss Whitmore? I think loyalty is earned, Mr. Polk, not demanded. Something shifted in his expression. Just a flicker. But Clara saw it a spark of interest where there had been only calculation. That's an unusual thing to say, he said slowly. Most folks in this town know better than to have opinions about things like that. I'm not from this town. No. He looked at her for a long moment. No, you're not. He stepped aside, clearing her path. Give my regards to the patient. And tell Mrs. Foster that Mr. Delaney looks forward to seeing her at the cattleman's dinner on Saturday. He hopes she'll bring her niece. He walked away without waiting for a response. Clara stood in the middle of the street, her hands trembling at her sides. She waited until he was out of sight before she let herself breathe. Then she walked back to Emmeline's house as fast as her legs would carry her. Samuel was on his feet when she came through the door. He took one look at her face, and his expression hardened. What happened? Josiah Polk. Clara closed the door behind her and leaned against it. He knows something's wrong. He knows I'm not Emmeline's niece. He knows you're not my husband. Did he say that directly? He didn't have to. Clara's voice shook. He invited us to dinner, at Delaney's house, Saturday night. Samuel went very still. Delaney's testing us, wants to see how we react. How do we react? We go. Clara stared at him. You can barely stand. You have 2 bullet wounds that are less than a week old. And you want to walk into the house of the man whose people tried to kill you. I want to look him in the eye. Samuel's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. I want to see his face when he realizes the man he thought was dead is sitting at his dinner table. That's insane. Probably. You'll get us all killed. Maybe. Clara pushed off from the door and crossed the room until she was standing directly in front of him. Close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. Close enough to smell the soap she'd used to wash his wounds. I did not survive that train platform, she said slowly. And this town, and these past 3 weeks of hell, just to die because some half-dead stranger decided to play hero. If you want to get yourself killed, that's your choice. But you don't get to take me and Emmeline with you. Samuel looked at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, You're right. Clara blinked. What? You're right. I don't have the right to make that choice for you. He stepped back, putting space between them. I'll find another way. I'll leave tonight, draw Polk away from here, make sure Delaney's attention follows me instead of staying on this house. You can't ride. You can barely walk. I've done harder things in worse condition. And died doing them. Not yet. Clara wanted to shake him, wanted to scream at him for being so stubborn, so single-minded, so determined to throw his life away for something that wouldn't bring his family back. Instead, she heard herself say, We'll go to the dinner. Samuel's eyes narrowed. What? Emmeline and I. We'll go. We'll smile and make conversation, and be exactly what Delaney expects a widow and her niece grateful for his hospitality, too insignificant to worry about. And me. You stay here. You rest. You heal. Clara's voice was steady now. And when Saturday comes, you let us handle Marcus Delaney. Samuel shook his head. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm telling you. Clara met his gaze. You said actions matter more than words. Well, this is action. This is me choosing to help you not because you asked, but because Delaney took something from someone I cared about too. Ezra Compton was supposed to be my future. He died because he wouldn't sell his land to that man. I may have arrived too late to save him, but I'm not too late to make sure his death meant something. Samuel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most foolish. Can't it be both? He almost smiled again, that same softening of his features that made him look human. Both it is, he said quietly. Clara nodded. She turned to leave, then stopped. Sam. He looked at her. Don't die while I'm gone on Saturday. I've gotten used to having someone to argue with. She left before he could respond. But behind her, in the small room that smelled of soap and blood, and something that might have been hope, Samuel Harding stood alone and allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in a very long time. not gratitude, not relief. Something more dangerous than either of those. Something that had Clara Whitmore's name written all over it. Saturday came faster than Clara expected. She spent the days between preparing learning everything Emmeline could tell her about Marcus Delaney, his house, his habits, his weaknesses. There weren't many weaknesses. Delaney was a man who had built his empire by eliminating anything that threatened it, including his own vulnerabilities. But Emmeline knew things. Small things. The kind of details that accumulated over decades of watching and listening in a town that forgot she was paying attention. She knew that Delaney's wife had left him 11 years ago, ran off with a cattle buyer from Kansas City, and never looked back. She knew that Delaney had a son somewhere estranged who wanted nothing to do with the family business. She knew that the thing Marcus Delaney feared most in the world wasn't death or failure or poverty. It was irrelevance. He built this empire to prove something, Emmeline said the night before the dinner. To who I don't know. Maybe his father, maybe himself, maybe God. But everything he does, every acre he acquires, every man he destroys, it's all about making sure the world remembers he was here. Clara filed this information away. She didn't know yet how to use it, but she had the feeling it would matter. On Saturday evening, she put on her best dress, the only good dress she had brought from Missouri, meant for her wedding to a dead man, and let Emmeline pin up her hair. "You look like a lady," Emmeline said, studying her in the mirror. "I look like bait." "Same thing in this town." Emmeline's hands were steady as she fixed the final pin. "Remember what I told you. Smile, nod, say nothing of substance. Let Delaney talk. Men like him love the sound of their own voices. The more he talks, the less attention he pays to what you're doing." What am I doing? Watching? Listening? Learning? Emmeline met her eyes in the mirror. And surviving. That's the most important part. Whatever happens in that house tonight, you walk out alive. Understood? Clara nodded. She went to check on Samuel before they left. He was sitting by the window watching the light fade, his expression unreadable. "We're going," she said. He turned to look at her. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise maybe, or something else when he saw her in the dress. "You look—" He stopped, started again. "Be careful." "I will. I mean it, Clara." He stood across the room until he was close enough that she could see the worry etched in the lines around his eyes. "Delaney is dangerous. Polk is dangerous. These are not men who play fair, and they don't show mercy to people who cross them." "I know. If something goes wrong, then I'll handle it." Clara lifted her chin. "I've been handling things my whole life, Sam, long before you rode into this town bleeding on Emmeline's doorstep." He looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he reached out and touched her hand. Just his fingers brushing against hers, light and brief, and over almost before it began. "Come back," he said quietly. "That's all I ask. Just come back." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that she would, that nothing in that house could keep her from walking out again. But words felt inadequate, so instead she just nodded. And then she walked out the door, leaving Samuel Harding alone with his worry and his wounds, and the growing certainty that Clara Whitmore had become something he couldn't afford to lose. The Delaney ranch house was everything Clara expected and worse. It sprawled across the top of a low-rise, visible for miles in every direction. A statement, not a home. Every window blazed with light as their borrowed buggy approached, and the sounds of music and laughter drifted across the evening air. "Breathe," Emmeline said quietly beside her. "And remember, you're nobody important, just a niece, visiting from back east. Forgettable, invisible." Clara nodded. She stepped down from the buggy and walked into the lion's den. Marcus Delaney was waiting for them in the entrance hall. He was shorter than Clara expected. Compact and well-dressed, with silver hair combed back from a face that might have been handsome once before. Whatever lived behind his eyes had hardened it into something else. His smile was warm. His handshake was firm. And when he looked at Clara, She felt like a mouse being measured by a cat that wasn't quite hungry yet. "Mrs. Foster," he said, releasing Emmeline's hand. "So glad you could join us. And this must be the niece I've heard so much about." "Clara Whitmore." She kept her voice steady. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Delaney. Please call me Marcus." His eyes lingered on her face a moment too long. "I understand you've had quite the journey to reach us. All the way from Missouri, wasn't it?" "Yes, sir. And your husband, I hear he's been unwell." "Recovering nicely, thank you. The doctor says he should be on his feet within the week." "I'm glad to hear it." Delaney's smile didn't waver. "We should arrange for him to join us once he's well enough. I'd very much like to meet the man who captured Mrs. Foster's niece." There was something in the way he said it, a weight beneath the words that made Clara's skin prickle. "I'm sure he'd appreciate that," she said. Delaney gestured toward the interior of the house. "Please come in. The other guests are already gathered. I believe you know most of them, Mrs. Foster." They followed him through a series of rooms that Clara deliberately didn't look at. She kept her eyes on Delaney's back, on the way he moved, the way the servant stepped aside when he passed, as though proximity to him was something to be avoided. The main room was full of people. Ranchers and their wives mostly. Men with weathered faces, and women in their best dresses, all of them wearing expressions that hovered somewhere between pleasure and performance. And standing near the fireplace, watching the room with those pale, colorless eyes, was Josiah Polk. He raised his glass slightly when he saw Clara. A greeting, or a warning. She couldn't tell which. "Mingle," Emmeline murmured beside her. "Smile. Don't look at Polk more than once. I'll find out what I can from the wives." Clara nodded. She accepted a glass of punch from a passing servant and made her way into the crowd. For the next hour, she did exactly what Emmeline had instructed. She smiled. She nodded. She made small talk about the weather and the price of cattle and the difficulty of finding good help these days. She was forgettable, invisible, exactly what she needed to be. But she was also watching. She watched the way certain men moved closer when Delaney entered their conversations, the way others found reasons to drift away. She watched the wives exchange glances that spoke volumes without a single word. She watched Josiah Polk circle the room like a shark, never staying in one place too long, always positioning himself where he could see the most. And she watched Marcus Delaney. He was good, better than good. Every word, every gesture, every laugh seemed genuine, warm. The kind of man you'd trust with your money, your land, your secrets. But Clara had spent 3 weeks learning to survive in a town that didn't want her. She had learned to read the space between what people said and what they meant. And what she read in Marcus Delaney was calculation so deep it had become invisible to everyone who wasn't looking for it. "Miss Whitmore?" She turned. Josiah Polk had materialized beside her close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Mr. Polk." "Enjoying the party." "It's very generous of Mr. Delaney to host. He's a generous man." Polk's eyes never left her face. To his friends. And to his enemies. The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. Something flickered in Polk's expression. Surprise maybe, or amusement. "Mr. Delaney doesn't have enemies, Miss Whitmore. Just people who haven't realized yet that they should be his friends." "That sounds like a threat." "Does it?" Polk smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I prefer to think of it as practical advice. This territory can be unforgiving to those who make the wrong alliances. A woman alone with no family, no resources." He let the sentence hang. "Well, it's best to have powerful friends in a place like this." Clara's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. "I appreciate your concern for my welfare." "It's not your welfare I'm concerned about." Polk leaned closer. "It's your honesty. See, I've been asking around about your husband, the sick one, the one nobody in town has ever seen." Clara's blood went cold. And the funny thing is, Polk continued, nobody can tell me his name, or where he came from, or what business brought him to Dusty Creek in the first place. He paused. You want to explain that to me, Miss Whitmore? My husband's business is his own. In this town, everybody's business is Mr. Delaney's business. Then perhaps Mr. Delaney should ask him directly, when he's well enough to receive visitors. Polk studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound that had nothing to do with humor. You've got spine, I'll give you that. Most women would be crying by now. I'm not most women. No. His eyes traveled over her face. No, you're not. He stepped back. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Miss Whitmore, and give my regards to your husband. He walked away, leaving Clara standing alone with her heart hammering against her ribs. She needed to find Emmeline, needed to warn her that Polk knew, or at least suspected, needed to get out of this house before Miss Whitmore. Clara turned. A young woman stood behind her early 20s, blonde hair pinned in an elaborate style, wearing a dress that cost more than Clara had ever owned in her life. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red-rimmed, as though she'd been crying recently. I'm sorry to bother you, the woman said quietly. But you're Mrs. Foster's niece, aren't you? The one who came from Missouri? Yes. I'm Elizabeth Harmon. My father owns the ranch north of here. She glanced around nervously. I need to speak with you, privately. It's important. Clara hesitated. This could be a trap. Everything in this house could be a trap. But something in the young woman's face made her pause. Fear, yes, but something else too. Desperation. All right, Clara said. Lead the way. Elizabeth led her through a side door and down a narrow hallway until they reached a small sitting room. She checked the corridor in both directions before closing the door. Thank you for coming, she said. I know this seems strange. I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't. She stopped, took a breath. My father is going to sign over our water rights to Mr. Delaney tonight. He doesn't want to. It'll ruin us. But Mr. Delaney has some kind of evidence that he's threatening to make public if father doesn't cooperate. Clara's mind raced. What kind of evidence? I don't know exactly. Something about a debt that was paid years ago. Documents that say it wasn't paid. Father swears he cleared that debt, but the paperwork Delaney has says otherwise. Elizabeth's voice cracked. If those documents become public, father could be arrested, charged with fraud. We'd lose everything. And you think Delaney fabricated them? I know he did. Elizabeth's eyes met hers. I overheard him and Mr. Polk talking 2 nights ago. They were laughing about how easy it was, how father would never be able to prove the documents were fake because the original clerk who recorded the payment died last year. Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. The same tactic, the same pattern. Create a debt manufacture, evidence apply pressure until the victim had no choice but to surrender. It was how Delaney had destroyed Ezra Compton. And it was how he was destroying Elizabeth's father. Why are you telling me this? Clara asked. Because I heard what you said to Mr. Polk just now, about not being most women. Elizabeth's hands twisted together. Mrs. Foster helped my mother once years ago. She's the only person in this town who isn't afraid of Marcus Delaney. I thought maybe you might know what to do. Clara didn't know what to do. She was a mail-order bride who never got married, working in a general store nursing a wounded stranger who might get them all killed. But she also couldn't walk away from this, not when the pattern was so clear, not when the same monster was destroying another family the way he had destroyed Ezra Compton's future. Where are these documents now? Clara asked. In Mr. Delaney's study, 2nd floor. He showed them to father this afternoon to make sure he understood what would happen if he didn't sign. Is the study locked? I don't know. But everyone's downstairs for the dinner. It might be... Elizabeth stopped. You can't be thinking of going up there. I'm not thinking anything. Clara's mind was already calculating distances, risks, opportunities. Go back to the party. Act normal. If anyone asks, we talked about dressmaking patterns. Miss Whitmore. Clara. Clara. Elizabeth caught her arm. If Delaney catches you in his study, he'll kill you. Or Polk will. They don't leave witnesses. Then I won't get caught. Clara left the sitting room before Elizabeth could argue further. She slipped back into the hallway and found a servant's staircase that led to the second floor. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was insane. This was exactly the kind of reckless behavior that got people killed. But as she climbed those stairs, she thought about Ezra Compton, about a man who had refused to sell his land and paid for it with his life. About Samuel Harding, lying wounded in Emmeline's back room, carrying a grief so heavy it had hollowed him out from the inside. About all the people Marcus Delaney had destroyed because they were inconvenient, because they stood in his way. Someone had to stop him, and tonight in this house, Clara was the only one who could try. The study door was unlocked. Clara slipped inside and closed it behind her. She didn't light a lamp. The moonlight coming through the window was enough to see by, and a light would draw attention. The desk was massive, covered in papers and ledgers. Clara started searching her fingers, moving quickly through stacks of correspondence bills of sale land deeds. She found what she was looking for in the bottom drawer. A folder unmarked containing a collection of documents that made her stomach turn. Fabricated debt records for half a dozen ranchers in the territory. Letters threatening legal action. Signed confessions that looked coerced. And in the middle of it all, a document that made Clara's blood go cold. A death certificate for a man named Thomas Whitmore. Her hands started shaking. She pulled the certificate out and held it up to the moonlight. Thomas Whitmore. Cause of death mining accident. Date 18 months ago. Except it wasn't a death certificate. It was a murder confession. Attached to the certificate was a letter handwritten detailing exactly how Thomas Whitmore had been killed. Not by an accident in the mine, but by a cave-in that had been deliberately caused. The letter named the men who had done it, the amount they had been paid, and the man who had ordered it. Marcus Delaney. Clara's dead fiancé hadn't been Ezra Compton. He had been Thomas Whitmore. And Marcus Delaney had murdered him. The door opened behind her. Find something interesting. Clara spun. Josiah Polk stood in the doorway, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. Miss Whitmore. He stepped into the room and closed the door. I had a feeling you weren't here for the punch. Clara's mind raced. The papers were still in her hands. Evidence of murder, of fraud, of everything Delaney had done. And she was trapped. I was looking for a washroom, she said. I got lost. In a locked drawer. Polk moved closer. You're smarter than that excuse, Miss Whitmore, and I think we both know what you're holding. Letters, nothing important. Then you won't mind if I take a look. He reached for the papers. Clara stepped back. Or, Polk continued, you can hand them over quietly, walk back downstairs, and pretend this never happened. Mr. Delaney might even let you leave town alive, as a professional courtesy. Professional courtesy for what? For entertaining us. Polk smiled. It's been a while since anyone was stupid enough to try something like this. I almost admire it. Clara's back hit the wall. She had nowhere left to go. The man in Emmeline's house, she said. The one you shot at Miller's Creek. He's a federal marshal. Polk's smile flickered. He's been tracking you for 8 months. He knows what you did, what Delaney did, and he's already sent word to a federal judge in San Antonio. It was a gamble. Clara didn't know if the telegram had actually reached Judge Whitfield. Didn't know if it would matter, even if it had. But she saw the doubt flash across Polk's face. Just for a second. You're bluffing, he said. Am I? Clara lifted her chin. Kill me, and you'll never know for sure. Let me walk out of here, and maybe you'll have time to run before the marshals arrive. Polk studied her. The silence stretched between them thick and dangerous. Then he laughed. I was right about you, Miss Whitmore. You've got spine. He stepped back and opened the door. Go. Take your papers. But understand something, there's nowhere in this territory you can hide that Mr. Delaney won't find you. Whatever you think those documents are worth, they're not worth your life." Clara didn't wait for him to change his mind. She pushed past him and walked out of the study, the folder clutched against her chest. She found Emmeline near the front door, already wearing her coat. "We're leaving," Clara said. "Now." Emmeline took one look at her face and didn't ask questions. They walked out of Delaney's house without looking back. The ride back to town was silent. Clara sat with the folder in her lap, her hands still shaking. Everything she thought she knew about her situation had just been destroyed and rebuilt in the space of 5 minutes. Thomas Whitmore, her dead fiancé. Except he hadn't been Ezra Compton at all. She had been sent a ticket under a false name, brought to this town under false pretenses, and the man who was supposed to marry her, the man whose death had left her stranded, had been murdered by Marcus Delaney. Nothing about her arrival in Dusty Creek had been an accident. Someone had wanted her here. The question was, who they reached Emmeline's house just before midnight. Samuel was awake, standing by the window. He turned when Clara came through the door, and his expression shifted from relief to concern in the space of a heartbeat. "What happened?" Clara walked past him and spread the folder's contents across the kitchen table. "I found something," she said. "In Delaney's study. Evidence of fraud, coercion, and—" She stopped, swallowed. "And murder." Samuel moved to the table. His eyes scanned the documents quickly, professionally. Then he stopped at the death certificate. "Thomas Whitmore," he read. His voice had gone very quiet. "Clara, this is—" "I know what it is." Her voice cracked. "The man I was supposed to marry. The man they told me died of a heart attack. Ezra Compton. These are 2 different names." "I know." Clara sank into a chair. "Someone used a false name to bring me here. Made me think I was coming to marry Ezra Compton when the man was actually Thomas Whitmore. And Whitmore didn't die of natural causes, he was murdered. By Delaney." Samuel was silent for a long moment. Then he sat down across from her. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I should have told you days ago." Clara looked at him. Something in his expression made her stomach tighten. "The contact I was supposed to meet at Miller's Creek," Samuel said slowly. "The one who had information about Polk. His name was Thomas Whitmore." The room went very still. He was supposed to give me evidence that would bring down Delaney's entire operation. Documents, names, dates. Everything I needed to make a case. Samuel's jaw tightened. "He sent me a telegram 2 months ago saying he had it all, that he was willing to testify, that he'd been gathering evidence for years waiting for someone who could actually use it." "And then he died," Clara whispered. "And then he died, before I could get here, before I could protect him." Samuel looked at her. "Clara, I don't think you were sent here by accident. I think Thomas Whitmore sent for you." "Why?" "Insurance." Samuel picked up the folder. "If something happened to him, if Delaney got to him before I could, he needed someone he trusted to find these documents, someone who had a reason to look, someone who would keep digging until they found the truth. I never met him. I only knew him through letters. Why would he trust me?" "Because you were coming here to start a new life. Because you had nothing to lose. Because—" Samuel paused. "Because sometimes desperate men put their faith in strangers, and sometimes those strangers turn out to be exactly what they needed." Clara stared at the papers spread across the table. The evidence of so much suffering, so much cruelty, so much death. Thomas Whitmore had died to gather this. Had died knowing that someday, somehow, someone would find it, and that someone had turned out to be her. "What do we do now?" she asked. Samuel leaned forward. "We finish what Thomas started. We take this evidence to Judge Whitfield in San Antonio. We make sure Delaney and Polk face justice for everything they've done. Delaney knows I have these documents. Polk let me walk out, but he won't let me walk far." Then we leave tonight. You can barely ride. I've ridden in worse condition. Samuel's eyes met hers. Clara, this is the chance I've been waiting 8 months for. The chance to finally do something that matters. To make sure the people who destroy lives can't destroy any more. I'm not going to waste it because my shoulder hurts. Emmeline had been standing in the doorway listening. Now she stepped forward. Take the back roads, she said. Avoid the main trail to San Antonio. Delaney's men will be watching it by morning. She went to a cabinet and pulled out a small leather pouch. There's enough money here to get you both to the city and back. Don't argue, I've been saving it for emergencies, and this qualifies. Clara stood. Emmeline, I can't. You can, and you will. Emmeline pressed the pouch into her hands. I didn't help you just to watch you die in my kitchen. Go. Both of you. And when you get to San Antonio, make that bastard pay for everything he's done. Clara hugged her, tight and fierce and without words. Then she went to pack. 20 minutes later, she and Samuel rode out of Dusty Creek under a sky full of stars. Behind them, the town slept unaware that everything was about to change. Ahead of them, the road to San Antonio stretched dark and uncertain. And somewhere in the night, Marcus Delaney was discovering that his study had been searched, his secrets exposed, and his carefully constructed empire was about to come crashing down around him. The hunt had begun. But this time, Delaney wasn't the predator. He was the prey. They rode through the night without stopping. Samuel knew the back trails better than Clara expected. He led them through dry creek beds and rocky passes that seemed invisible until they were already inside them. His shoulder was bleeding again. She could see the dark stains spreading through his shirt, but he didn't slow down. How much farther? Clara asked when the first gray light of dawn began to seep into the sky. Another day if we push. Day and a half if we don't. You can't push. You're bleeding. I've bled before. Sam. He reined his horse to a stop and turned to look at her. His face was pale, his jaw tight with pain he wasn't admitting to. Every hour we stop is an hour Delaney uses to get ahead of us, he said. He has men, money, connections. The only advantage we have is speed. We have no advantage if you're dead before we get there. Something flickered in his expression. Not anger. Something softer. Something that looked almost like gratitude. You worry about me, he said. Someone has to. He studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. There's a place about 2 miles ahead, abandoned homestead. We can rest there for a few hours, but only a few. They reached the homestead just as the sun cleared the horizon. Clara helped Samuel down from his horse, and the way he leaned into her told her more about his condition than any words could. Inside, she made him sit while she unwrapped his shoulder. The stitches had held, but the wound was angry and inflamed. You need a real doctor, she said. I need to get to San Antonio. You need to not die on the way. He almost smiled. You really don't give up, do you? No. Clara rewrapped the bandage as gently as she could. I don't. His hand caught hers, just for a moment. His fingers were rough and warm against her skin. Clara. She looked up. His face was very close. When this is over, he said quietly, when Delaney is finished and Polk is in chains, I need you to know that I... A gunshot shattered the morning silence. They both hit the floor. Samuel's gun was in his hand before Clara had finished processing what was happening. Stay down, he said. Another shot. This one punched through the wall a foot above their heads. They found us, Clara breathed. Polk's men. Had to be watching the roads. Samuel moved toward the window, keeping low. How many rounds you got? I don't have a gun. He looked at her. For a second, something like despair crossed his face. Then he pulled a small revolver from his boot and pressed it into her hands. 5 shots. Make them count. Sam, I don't... You point and you squeeze. That's all there is to it. He checked his own weapon. When I move, you run for the horses. Don't look back. Don't stop. Ride straight for San Antonio and find Judge Whitfield. I'm not leaving you. Clara, I'm not leaving you. Her voice cracked. We started this together. We finish it together. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside voices were calling to each other. At least 3 men, maybe more. Together, he said finally. All right. The next few minutes were a blur of noise and terror and instinct. Samuel went out the front. Clara heard shots, heard shouting, heard a scream that might have been pain or might have been rage. She moved to the back door, the unfamiliar weight of the revolver in her hand, and came face to face with a man she didn't recognize. He was young, maybe 25. His gun was already raised. Clara didn't think. She squeezed the trigger. The revolver kicked in her hand. The man stumbled backward and fell. Clara stood frozen, staring at what she had done. Clara. Samuel's voice cut through the shock. Move. She moved. They got to the horses somehow. Clara didn't remember mounting, didn't remember kicking her horse into a gallop. She just remembered riding, with the sound of gunfire fading behind them, and Samuel's horse keeping pace beside hers. They didn't stop for 3 hours. When they finally slowed, Clara's hands were still shaking. I killed him, she said. Her voice sounded strange, distant. That man, I killed him. Samuel brought his horse alongside hers. His face was drawn exhausted, but his eyes were clear. You saved your life, he said. And mine. That's not murder, Clara. That's survival. It doesn't feel like survival. It never does. Not the first time. She looked at him. How many times have you had to survive, Sam? He was quiet for a moment. More than I wanted. Less than some. They rode on. By nightfall, they could see the lights of San Antonio in the distance. Clara had never been so grateful to see a city in her life. Every muscle ached. Every nerve was raw. The folder of evidence was still pressed against her chest, protected through everything that had happened. We need to find Judge Whitfield tonight, Samuel said, before Delaney's people realize where we've gone. Do you know where he lives? I know where he works, the federal courthouse. If he's not there, someone will know how to reach him. They found the courthouse just as the last of the evening light faded. Samuel dismounted slowly, painfully, and Clara saw him grip the saddle for support. Sam? I'm fine. You're not fine. You've been shot twice and you just rode 40 miles without rest. I'll rest when Delaney's in chains. He straightened with visible effort. Let's go. The courthouse was nearly empty at this hour. A single clerk sat at a desk near the entrance, looking up with surprise as they approached. We need to see Judge Whitfield, Samuel said. It's urgent. The judge has gone home for the evening. You'll have to come back tomorrow. This can't wait until tomorrow. Samuel pulled back his coat to show his badge. I'm a federal marshal. I have evidence of murder, fraud, and corruption involving one of the most powerful men in the territory. Judge Whitfield needs to see this tonight. The clerk's eyes went wide. Marshal, I don't have the authority to... Then find someone who does. Something in Samuel's voice made the clerk move. He disappeared into a back room and returned 5 minutes later with an older man in a rumpled suit. I'm Deputy Whitfield, the man said. The judge's son. What's this about? Samuel looked at him for a long moment. Is your father trustworthy? Excuse me. I've been tracking a man named Josiah Polk for 8 months. Every lead I've followed has been compromised. Every contact I've made has ended up dead. I need to know before I hand over this evidence that it won't disappear into someone's pocket. Deputy Whitfield's expression hardened. My father has spent 30 years fighting the kind of corruption you're describing. He's been threatened, bribed, and nearly killed twice. If you have evidence that can bring down Marcus Delaney, he'll move heaven and earth to use it. Samuel studied him. Then he looked at Clara. She nodded. Samuel handed over the folder. 2 hours later, they sat in Judge Whitfield's private study while the old man read through every document. He was exactly what Clara had imagined a federal judge would look like, white-haired, stern-faced, with eyes that missed nothing. He read slowly and carefully, occasionally making notes on a pad beside him. When he finished, he set down his pen and looked at them. "This is extraordinary," he said quietly. "I've suspected Delaney for years, but I never had proof. This," he tapped the folder, "this is enough to hang him." "And Polk?" Samuel asked. "Him too, along with at least a dozen others." Judge Whitfield leaned back in his chair. "Where did you get these documents?" "I took them from Delaney's study," Clara said. "The night of his dinner party." The judge's eyebrows rose. "You broke into Marcus Delaney's private study and stole his papers." "I walked through an unlocked door and found evidence of murder. I don't consider that theft." Something like respect flickered in the old man's eyes. "No, I don't suppose you would." He stood. "I'll need sworn statements from both of you. Then I'll issue arrest warrants for Delaney, Polk, and everyone named in these documents. By this time tomorrow, federal marshals will be on their way to Dusty Creek." Samuel exhaled slowly. For the first time since Clara had met him, some of the tension went out of his shoulders. "It's over," he said quietly. "After everything. It's finally over." Clara wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe that signing some papers and giving some testimony would be enough to end the nightmare that had consumed her life for the past month. But something in her gut told her it wasn't that simple. They spent the night in a boarding house near the courthouse, separate rooms, proper and appropriate. Clara lay awake for hours staring at the ceiling. She thought about Thomas Whitmore, the man she had never met, who had trusted her with his life's work without even knowing her name, who had brought her to Texas for a purpose she was only now beginning to understand. She thought about Ezra Compton, the name she had believed was real, the future she had imagined, the life that had never existed outside of carefully crafted letters. And she thought about Samuel Harding, about the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, about the way his hand had felt against hers, about the words he had started to say before the bullets interrupted them. "When this is over," he had said, "when Delaney is finished, I need you to know that I—" What? What had he needed her to know? A knock at her door made her sit up. "Clara," Samuel's voice low and uncertain. "Are you awake?" She went to the door and opened it. He stood in the hallway, still dressed, his wounded arm held carefully at his side. His face was shadowed, but she could see enough to know he hadn't slept either. "I couldn't." He stopped, started again. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine." "You killed a man today." "I know." "It's not something you forget. Not ever." He paused. "I just wanted you to know that if you needed to talk about it, or not talk about it, I'm here." Clara felt something shift in her chest, that same warmth she had felt in Emmeline's kitchen when he had touched her hand before leaving. "Come in," she said. They sat in the small room, not touching, not speaking, just existing in the same space. And somehow, that was enough. "I've been alone for 5 years," Samuel said finally, "since Mary and Ellen. I told myself it was because the work was too dangerous, because getting close to people put them at risk." He paused. "But the truth is, I was afraid that if I let someone in, I'd lose them too. And I didn't think I could survive that again." Clara listened without interrupting. "Then I ended up in Emmeline's back room with 2 bullets in me," he continued. "And this woman I'd never met refused to let me die. Argued with me, challenged me, walked into a monster's house and stole his secrets because it was the right thing to do." He turned to look at her. "I didn't plan to feel this way, Clara. I didn't want to feel this way. But somewhere between that first night and now, you became the thing I was most afraid of losing." Clara's throat tightened. "Sam, you don't have to say anything. I know this isn't. I know the timing is—" He shook his head. "I just needed you to know. In case tomorrow goes wrong. In case I don't get another chance to say it. Clara reached out and took his hand. Tomorrow isn't going to go wrong, she said. We have the evidence. We have the judge. Delaney's finished. You sound certain. I am certain. She squeezed his fingers. And when it's over, when he's in chains and Polk is facing justice, we're going to figure out what comes next. Together. Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss against her knuckles. Together, he said. They sat like that until dawn, their hands intertwined, saying nothing and saying everything at once. The arrest warrants were issued at noon the following day. Clara watched Judge Whitfield sign his name to each one, his pen moving with the deliberate precision of a man who understood the weight of what he was doing. I'm sending 12 marshals, the judge said. More than enough to handle whatever resistance Delaney puts up. By this time tomorrow he'll be in custody. I want to be there, Samuel said. Absolutely not. You're wounded, and you're emotionally compromised. The last thing I need is you doing something reckless that gives Delaney's lawyers an excuse to throw out the charges. Your Honor. Marshal Harding. The judge's voice was firm. You've done your job. You brought me the evidence I needed. Now let me do mine. Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment he nodded. What about me? Clara asked. You'll need to remain in San Antonio until the trial. Your testimony will be crucial. Judge Whitfield paused. I understand you were engaged to Thomas Whitmore, at least to the man using that identity. I was supposed to marry someone named Ezra Compton. I learned only recently that he was actually Thomas Whitmore. Whitmore's estate will need to be settled. As his intended bride, you may have a claim to his property, the 40 acres with water rights that Delaney wanted so badly. Clara stared at him. I never even met him. The law doesn't require you to have met him, only that you can prove he intended to marry you. The judge's expression softened slightly. It won't bring him back Miss Whitmore, but it might give you the foundation to build something new. Clara didn't know what to say. The possibility that she might own land, real land with water and value and a future, felt impossible to absorb. Samuel's hand found hers under the table. You deserve this, he said quietly. Whatever Thomas Whitmore intended when he brought you here, I think this is what he would have wanted. Clara thought about the letters she had treasured. The careful words, the gentle promises, the picture of a life that had seemed too good to be true. It had been too good to be true. But maybe something true could grow from its ashes. Thank you, Your Honor, she said. The marshals rode out that afternoon. Clara and Samuel stood on the courthouse steps and watched them go, 12 men on horseback, carrying warrants for the most powerful man in the territory. It's really happening, Clara said. It's really happening. She looked at him. This man who had ridden into her life bleeding and broken and refusing to die. Who had trusted her with his secrets and his pain, and something that felt very much like his heart. What happens now? She asked. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to face her fully. That depends on you. On me. I've spent 5 years running from place to place, never staying long enough to belong anywhere, but standing here with you watching justice finally happen. He paused. I don't want to run anymore, Clara. I want to stay. Build something. Put down roots. Wherever you are. Clara felt her breath catch. That might be Dusty Creek, she said. If I inherit Thomas's land, then I'll learn to like Dusty Creek. It's a terrible town. I've lived in worse. The people there hate me. Then we'll give them reasons not to. Samuel reached out and cupped her face in his hands. Clara Whitmore, I'm not a rich man. I'm not a young man. I've got more scars than sense and more regrets than I can count. But I can promise you this, if you let me, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never feel alone again. Clara looked into his eyes, saw the truth there, the hope, the fear of being rejected. That sounds like a proposal, she said. It is if you want it to be. She smiled. For the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled without any weight behind it. Then yes, she said. My answer is yes. Samuel kissed her. And standing on the steps of a federal courthouse in San Antonio, with the dust of the road still on their clothes, and the future stretched out before them like an open prairie, Clara Whitmore finally found the thing she had traveled 1,000 miles to find. Not a husband. Not security. Home. The news reached San Antonio 3 days later. Clara was in the boarding house mending a tear in her only good dress when Samuel came through the door. His face told her everything before he spoke a word. What happened? She asked. Delaney's dead. Clara's hands went still. When the marshals arrived at the ranch, he barricaded himself in his study, refused to surrender. Samuel sat down heavily. They tried to negotiate for 6 hours. In the end, he put a gun to his own head rather than face trial. Clara didn't know what to feel. Relief. Horror. Something that might have been disappointment because she had wanted to see him in chains. Wanted him to face the humiliation of a public trial, the condemnation of a jury, the knowledge that everything he had built was crumbling around him. Instead, he had chosen the coward's way out. And Polk? She asked. In custody, along with 11 others named in the documents you found. Samuel reached out and took her hand. It's over, Clara. Truly over. She looked at their intertwined fingers. It doesn't feel over. It will. Eventually. He paused. Judge Whitfield wants us back in his office tomorrow. There are papers to sign, testimony to finalize, and the matter of Thomas Whitmore's estate. Clara nodded. She had been trying not to think about the land, about the 40 acres with water rights that had cost a man his life. I don't know if I can accept it, she said quietly. Why not? Because I never knew him. Because he died for those acres, and I'm a stranger who showed up too late to matter. Her voice caught. It feels like theft, Sam. Taking something from a dead man I never met. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Can I tell you something about Thomas Whitmore? Clara looked at him. I've been tracking Polk for 8 months. In that time I learned a lot about the people Delaney destroyed. Thomas Whitmore was one of them. Samuel's voice was steady, careful. He was a good man, Clara. Decent. Hard-working. The kind of man who spent his whole life doing the right thing even when it cost him. That doesn't change the fact that I'm a stranger. No, but here's what I think. Samuel leaned forward. Thomas knew he was in danger. He knew Delaney would come for him eventually. He could have sold that land and run. Could have saved himself and let Delaney win. Instead, he gathered evidence. He reached out to me. And he sent for you. Why I keep asking that question, and I never get an answer that makes sense. Maybe the answer is simpler than you think. Samuel squeezed her hand. Maybe he wanted someone to build on what he started. Someone who didn't have ties to this territory. Someone who would see that land for what it could be, not what it had cost. Clara thought about the letters she had treasured. The careful descriptions of a house that probably never existed. The promises of a life that had been a cover story for something much more dangerous. But underneath those lies, hadn't there been something real? A longing for connection. A hope that someone out there might understand. I'll go to the judge's office tomorrow, she said finally. I'll sign whatever papers need signing, but I'm not doing it for Thomas Whitmore. Then who? Clara looked at him. For us. For whatever comes next. Samuel raised her hand to his lips. Whatever comes next, he repeated. I like the sound of that. The trial of Josiah Polk lasted 3 weeks. Clara testified on the 5th day. She sat in the witness chair and answered questions for 4 hours, describing everything she had seen and heard and done since arriving in Dusty Creek. Polk's lawyer tried to rattle her, tried to paint her as a fortune hunter, a liar, a woman who had fabricated evidence to steal a dead man's land. Clara kept her voice steady throughout. "I came to Texas to marry a man I had never met," she said. "I found out he was dead before I stepped off the train. I had 12 cents in my pocket and nowhere to go. Everything I did after that, I did to survive. And everything I found in Marcus Delaney's study, I found because a young woman named Elizabeth Harmon was afraid her father would be destroyed by the same lies that destroyed Thomas Whitmore." The lawyer sneered. "And you expect this jury to believe that a mail-order bride with no education, no connections, and no resources managed to infiltrate the home of the most powerful man in the territory and steal documents that dozens of lawmen had failed to find?" Clara looked him directly in the eye. "I expect this jury to believe the truth, sir, which is that powerful men often underestimate the people they consider insignificant. Mr. Delaney saw me as a poor woman with no value. He never imagined I might be dangerous." A ripple of reaction went through the courtroom. Clara saw several jurors nodding. The lawyer had no further questions. Samuel testified the following week. He told the story of his wife and daughter, of the 5 years he had spent tracking their killers, of the night he had ridden into an ambush at Miller's Creek and nearly died because someone had betrayed him. "Who betrayed you?" the prosecutor asked. "I believe it was a man named William Carter. He was supposed to be my contact. Instead, he led me into a trap." "Is William Carter in this courtroom today?" Samuel looked toward the defense table. "He's sitting right next to Mr. Polk." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. William Carter tried to run and was tackled by 2 marshals before he reached the door. It was Clara, thought almost worth everything they had been through, just to see the look on Josiah Polk's face in that moment. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Polk was sentenced to hang. William Carter received 20 years. The others faced varying terms, but all of them would spend the rest of their lives paying for what they had done. Clara stood in the courtroom as the verdicts were read. Samuel's hand warm in hers, and felt something she hadn't felt since stepping off that train in Dusty Creek. Closure. They returned to Dusty Creek in early September. The town looked different somehow, smaller, less threatening. The people who had refused to help Clara when she first arrived now nodded to her on the street. Some even smiled. "Amazing what happens when you take down the local tyrant," Emmeline said dryly when Clara mentioned it. "Suddenly everyone wants to be your friend." "I don't want their friendship." "Good. Most of them don't deserve it." Emmeline handed her a cup of coffee. "What I want to know is what you're planning to do with that land." Clara had been thinking about that question for weeks. "Thomas Whitmore wanted to build something," she said slowly. "Something that would last. Something that would matter. And I think I know what it should be." The following month, Clara and Samuel were married in the small church at the edge of Dusty Creek. Emmeline stood as witness. Elizabeth Harmon came with her father, who shook Clara's hand with tears in his eyes and thanked her for saving his family. Even Deputy Will Hutchins showed up wearing a sheriff's badge now that the old sheriff had been removed for corruption. The ceremony was simple. The words were plain. But when Samuel slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, she felt the weight of it settle into her bones, like an anchor finding bottom. "I love you," he said quietly. "Whatever comes next." "Whatever comes next," she repeated. They kissed while the small congregation applauded. And for the first time since her mother died, Clara Whitmore. Clara Harding now felt like she belonged somewhere. The first year was hard. They built a small house on Thomas Whitmore's land. Samuel's land now. Their land. Every board nailed, every fence post set, every seed planted was done with their own hands. Clara learned to do things she had never imagined. She learned to repair a water pump, birth a calf, negotiate with cattle buyers who tried to take advantage of a woman rancher. Samuel learned to stay in one place to build instead of destroy, to let himself want things again without the weight of guilt dragging him down. They fought sometimes, about money, about priorities, about the 1,000 small decisions that made up a life built from nothing. But they always found their way back to each other, and every morning when Clara woke to find Samuel beside her, she knew that whatever they faced, they would face it together. Emmeline visited often. She had sold her share of the general store and moved into a small cottage on the edge of their property. "Someone needs to keep an eye on you two," she said when Clara protested. "Make sure you don't work yourselves to death." "We're fine. You're stubborn. There's a difference." But Emmeline smiled when she said it. In the spring of the second year, Clara received a letter. It was from Elizabeth Harmon, who had married a lawyer from San Antonio and moved to the city. The letter was warm and chatty, full of news about her new life, but there was one paragraph that made Clara's heart stop. "I've been going through my father's old papers," Elizabeth wrote, "and I found something I think you should see. A letter Thomas Whitmore wrote before he died. It was addressed to you, but it was never sent. I'm enclosing it with my best wishes and deepest gratitude for everything you did for our family." Clara opened the second envelope with trembling hands. The letter was dated 2 weeks before Thomas Whitmore's death. "My dearest Clara," it began. "By the time you read this, I may be gone. Marcus Delaney has been circling closer, and I do not think I will survive what is coming. But I want you to know that everything I wrote to you was true, even when the details were not." Clara's eyes blurred with tears. She kept reading. "I am not who I said I was. I am not a simple rancher looking for a wife. I am a man who has spent years gathering evidence against the most dangerous man in this territory. And I am sending for you because I need someone outside of Delaney's reach to carry on what I've started. I chose you because of your letters, because of the strength I could see in your words, because when you wrote about losing your parents and starting over alone, I recognized someone who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. If you are reading this, it means I failed. But I pray that you succeeded where I could not, that you found the documents I hid, that you brought Marcus Delaney to justice, that the land I'm leaving to you will become what I always dreamed it could be, a home. I never met you, Clara Whitmore, but I think I would have loved you if I had. Thank you for finishing what I started. Thomas." Clara sat with that letter for a long time. She thought about the man who had written it, who had risked everything to stop a monster, who had reached across the miles to find a stranger he believed could carry his burden. He had been right to believe in her. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the box where she kept her most precious things. Then she went to find Samuel. He was by the creek repairing a section of fence that had come down in last week's storm. He looked up when she approached, and his face softened the way it always did when he saw her. "Everything all right?" "Yes." Clara showed him the letter. Samuel read it slowly. When he finished, he handed it back. "He was a good man," Samuel said. "I wish I could have met him. I think he would have liked you. I think he would have been glad to know his land ended up in your hands." Samuel pulled her close. "Our hands." Clara leaned into him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gotten on that train? If I had stayed in Missouri?" "No." "Why not?" Samuel kissed the top of her head. "Because you did get on that train. You did come here, and everything that happened after that made us who we are." He paused. "I don't believe in fate, Clara, but I believe that the choices we make lead us to where we're supposed to be, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Clara looked up at him, this man who had ridden into her life bleeding and broken, who had trusted her with his pain and his secrets and his heart. "So am I," she said. 3 years later, their daughter was born. They named her Ellen after the child Samuel had lost. Clara watched him hold her for the first time, watched the tears stream down his weathered face, and knew that something broken inside him had finally begun to heal. "Hello, little one," Samuel whispered. "I'm your father, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much you're loved." Clara reached out and touched his arm. She knows Sam. She already knows. Their ranch grew over the years. The 40 acres Thomas Whitmore had left them became 60, then 100. They hired hands, built a proper barn, established a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. The people of Dusty Creek who had once refused to help Clara now came to her for advice, for loans, for the kind of practical wisdom that only came from building something from nothing. She helped when she could, and when she couldn't, she pointed them toward someone who could. "You've become quite the pillar of the community," Emmeline observed one afternoon watching Clara settle a dispute between two neighboring ranchers. "I've become someone who remembers what it's like to have nothing," Clara replied. "That's not the same thing." "Maybe not, but it's better." On the anniversary of their 10th year in Dusty Creek, Clara and Samuel rode out to the ridge at the eastern edge of their property. It was the highest point on their land, the place where you could see for miles in every direction. They had come here on their first day as landowners, standing in the dirt, and trying to imagine what their future might look like. Now they stood in the same spot with a home behind them, a daughter growing strong, and a life neither of them had dared to hope for. "Remember when you showed up at Emmeline's door bleeding all over her clean floors?" Clara asked. "I remember you telling me not to die in your room." "It was good advice." "It was." Samuel pulled her close. "I took it." Clara looked out at the land that stretched before them. Land that had been watered with blood and tears and hope. Land that had cost so many people so much, but also land that had given them everything. "Do you think Thomas would be proud," she asked quietly, "of what we've built?" "I think Thomas would be amazed." Samuel's voice was soft. "A woman he never met married a man he never knew, and together they turned his 40 acres into something worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for." Samuel turned her to face him. "That's the difference, Clara. Thomas died trying to build something. We got to finish it. We got to live in it. That's the gift he gave us whether he knew it or not." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I wish I could have thanked him." "You did." Samuel cupped her face in his hands. "Every fence post, every calf born, every morning you wake up and choose to build instead of run. That's your thank you. And I think wherever he is, he knows." Clara kissed him, long and slow and full of everything she had never been able to put into words. When they pulled apart, the sun was setting over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Take me home," Clara said. Samuel smiled. "Yes, ma'am." They rode back together through land that belonged to them toward a house full of warmth and light, toward a daughter who would grow up knowing she was loved, toward a future that had once seemed impossible. Clara Whitmore had arrived in Dusty Creek with 12 cents in her pocket and a letter full of lies. She had found betrayal, danger, death. But she had also found Emmeline Foster, who had given her work when no one else would. Thomas Whitmore, who had trusted her with his legacy. Samuel Harding, who had given her his heart. She had found home. And in the end, that was worth more than any fortune, any land, any promise made on paper. Because home wasn't a place you arrived at. It was something you built. One choice at a time, one day at a time, one love at a time. Clara Harding had built hers from nothing, and it would last forever.